Hello, and welcome to the Casual Decks, where Dex does text on the decks that you want to play today. Today's episode is going to be our first ever viewer-submitted deck, so special shout out to Taro for submitting this list we're about to review. Before we get into it, I do want to ask that if you enjoy any type of Commander content, please consider subscribing and turning on the notifications to stay alerted for when new videos of mine go live. Leaving a like or even commenting down below is greatly appreciated and helps the channel out a lot. If you're feeling especially generous and want to go above and beyond to help support this channel, I have started a Patreon, and at any tier you do gain access to my channel's Patreon-only section on Discord with special patron-exclusive roles and other rewards that will change as the channel grows. If you check the description below, you will also find a link to everything Dex, so be sure to check that out as well. Now, with that out of the way, let's get into the episode. Today's viewer-submitted deck is all about the party and is led by Tazri, Beacon of Unity. This commander costs 4 generic and a white for a 4/6 human warrior that reads, "This creature costs 1 generic less to cast for each creature in your party," with an ability for blue, black, red, and a green, or 2 generic for each to look at the top 6 cards of your library. You may reveal up to 2 cleric, rogue, warrior, wizard, and or ally cards from among them and put them into your hand. Put the rest to the bottom of your library in a random order. With access to all 5 colors, we have plenty of resources at our disposal, and this deck has quite a few interesting options to really get the party pumping. Starting off with the lands and mana, we have a total of 34 lands, including 1 basic of each color. All 10 of the shock lands, which enter untapped for either of their respective colors if you pay 2 life. All 10 of the filter lands, which tap for a generic or for one of the colors it provides, you double up and get 2 of one or both colors within that land's access. We have Arcane Lighthouse, Base Camp, and City of Brass. Lighthouse taps for generic or for 1 and tap until end of turn. Creatures your opponents control lose Hexproof and Shroud and cannot get Hexproof or Shroud. Base Camp enters tapped and taps for a generic, or we can tap to add 1 mana of any color, and only spend this mana to cast a cleric, rogue, warrior, or wizard spell, or to activate an ability of one of the mentioned types. While City of Brass deals 1 damage to us when it's tapped, we can tap it for any 1 mana of any color. Command Tower, Exotic Orchard, and Fabled Passage. Tower taps for any color within our commander's identity. Exotic Orchard taps for 1 mana of any color, a land our opponents control, which is never bad being as this is a 5-color deck. And Fabled Passage sacrifices itself and lets us search for 1 basic land, and that land enters tapped unless we control 4 or more lands, and the last 3 lands are Mana Confluence, Reflecting Pool, and Thespian Stage. Confluence taps and makes us pay 1 life to add 1 mana of any color to our mana pool. Reflecting Pool taps for any mana that a land we control could produce, and Thespian Stage taps for generic or for 2 and tap it. Thespian Stage becomes a copy of target land, except it has this ability, which is always nice to have if an opponent happens to play something we can abuse for ourselves. Continuing into the build with our mana fixing and ramp options, we have Arcane Signet, Chromatic Lantern, and Chromatic Ori. Signet taps for any color within our commander's identity. Lantern gives lands we control tap to add 1 mana of any color, and we can tap the Lantern to add 1 mana of any color as well, while Ori lets us spend mana, or mana of any color, and also taps for 5 generic, or for 5 we can tap it and draw a card for each color of mana used among permanents we control. Farseek, Lotus Petal, and Mana Reflection are great options, with Farseek letting us search for a plains, island, swamp, or mountain, and puts it into the battlefield tapped, then shuffle the library. Lotus Petal sacrifices for any 1 color mana we want, and we play this as a mana source. While Mana Reflection likes to double up on the drinks, and reads, if you tap a permanent for mana, it produces twice as much of that mana instead. We also have Mariah's Wake, Soul Ring, Tempt with Discovery. Mariah's Wake gives creatures we control +1/+1, and when we tap a land for mana, add 1 mana to our mana pool of any type that land produced. And Tempt with Discovery is peer pressure in a card form, letting us search our library for a land and put it into the battlefield tapped. Each of our opponents can choose to do the same with their lands, and their lands enter untapped, but for each opponent that chooses to give into the pressure and grab a land, we get to do the same, and they also enter untapped. Have you ever been to a party where someone shows up wearing the same outfit as you, or takes something that doesn't necessarily belong to them? Well, these cards are those people. We have Agent of Treachery, Beguiler of Wills, and Clever Impersonator. Agent of Treachery enters the battlefield and lets us gain control of target permanent, and at the beginning of our end step, if we control 3 or more permanents that we don't own, we get to draw a card. Beguiler of Wills is a 1/1 human wizard with tap to gain control of target permanent with power less than or equal to the number of creatures we control, while Clever Impersonator will leave our opponents seeing double as a 0/0 shapeshifter that enters the battlefield as a copy of any non-land permanent on the battlefield. Evil Twin and Vizier of Many Faces are the last 2 in this category, with Evil Twin being another 0/0 shapeshifter, but its enter the battlefield trigger is it enters as a copy of any creature on the battlefield except it gains, for Dimir colors and tap it, we destroy target creature with the same name as this creature, and Vizier of Many Faces is another 0/0 shapeshifter, but as a cleric, with you may have Vizier enter the battlefield as a copy of any creature on the battlefield, except if Vizier of Many Faces was cast for its embalm cost of 3 and double blue, it's a zombie in a addition to its other types. This card is more of just another copy creature effect, but we all know I have a love for zombies, so if you cast this for its embalm cost just to make a zombie, know that I'm proud of you. Sometimes you just have to take charge and lead the party, and sometimes you need to just find your friends. We can do both with cards like Eladamri's Call, Mystical Tutor, and Shared Summons. Eladamri's Call lets us search our library for a creature card, reveal that card, and put it into our hand, then shuffle the library. Mystical Tutor finds us an instance or sorcery, we also reveal it, then shuffle the library, then put the card on top of it, while Shared Summon lets us find up to 2 creatures with different names, reveal them, and put them into our hand, then shuffle our library. We can also try to draw into more friends and effects with cards like Arcanus the Omnipotent, Ghostly Pilfer, or Mangara the Diplomat. Arcanus is a 3/4 wizard that taps to let us draw 3 cards, or if in emergency, we can pay 2 and double blue to return Arcanus to our hand. Ghostly Pilfer is a 2/1 spirit rogue that reads whenever Ghostly Pilfer becomes untapped, we may pay 2 to draw a card, and whenever an opponent casts a spell from anywhere other than their hand, we also draw a card, and a free discard outlet that we don't really care too much about on its own to make Ghostly Pilfer unable to be blocked. We also have Notion Thief in this deck as a 3/1 human rogue with flash, and if an opponent would draw a card except for the first one on each of his or her draw steps, instead that player skips that draw and we get to draw the card instead. Time this one right because it's bound to get a spotlight on it if our opponents feel like drawing any extra cards for the rest of the game. We have some ways for crowd control with cards like Cyclonic Rift, Heroic Intervention, and Wrath of God. Cyclonic bounces a target non-land permanent we don't control to its owner's hand, and for its overload cost of 6 and a blue, we bounce all non-land permanents we don't control to its owner's hand. Heroic Intervention grants permanents we control hexproof and indestructible until end of turn, while Wrath of God is the only true creature board wipe in the deck, and it destroys all creatures and they can't be regenerated. We're also running Asceticism, Narset's Reversal, and Nexus of Fate. Asceticism makes creatures we control unable to be targeted by spells or abilities our opponents control, and for 1 and a green, we can regenerate target creature. Narset's Reversal lets us copy target instant or sorcery spell, then return it to its owner's hand, then select new targets for the copy, while Nexus of Fate can just let us try and end the game by giving us an extra turn. If it would enter the graveyard from anywhere, we reveal Nexus of Fate and shuffle it into our library instead to use it again later if we don't pull the win on the first cast. We have plenty of ways to fill the house and find plenty of party goers with the God of Parties, Xenagos the Reveler. This planeswalker comes in with 3 loyalty counters and a +1 ability that reads add X mana of any combination of red and or green to your mana pool, where X is equal to the number of creatures you control. The 0 ability lets us put a 2/2 red and green satyr creature token onto the battlefield, and the -6 is a doozy where we exile the top 7 cards of our library. You may put any number of creature and or land cards from among them onto the battlefield. We also run Outlaw's Merriment and Search of Azcanta. Outlaw's Merriment triggers at the beginning of our upkeep where we choose one of 3 options at random. We create a red and white creature token with one of the following characteristics: a 3/1 human warrior with trample and haste, a 2/1 human cleric with lifelink and haste, or a 1/2 human rogue with haste, and when this creature enters the battlefield, it deals 1 damage to any target. Search for Azcanta is a transformation card that starts as an enchantment that reads, at the beginning of your upkeep, look at the top card of your library. You may put that card into your graveyard, then if you have 7 or more cards in your graveyard, you may transform Search for Azcanta. Once transformed, we now have a legendary land that taps for a blue, or for 2 and a blue, and tap it. We look at the top 4 cards of our library, and we can reveal a non-creature, non-land from among them, and put it into our hand, then put the rest to the bottom of our library. Recursion is also going to play a part in this deck to keep members coming back with Archaeomancer, Drana the Last Bloodchief, and Kess Dissident Mage. Archaeomancer is a 1/2 human wizard that enters the battlefield and lets us return target instant or sorcery from our graveyard to our hand. Drana is a 4/4 vampire cleric with flying, and whenever Drana attacks, defending player chooses a non-legendary creature card in our graveyard that we get to return to the battlefield with a +1/+1 counter on it, and that creature is a vampire in addition to its other types. While Kess Dissident Mage is a 3/4 human wizard with flying that lets us cast an instant or sorcery from our graveyard during each of our turn. If a card cast this way would enter the graveyard, it's exiled instead. We're also running Lazav the Multifarious and Aura Skyclave Hierophant. Lazav is a 1/3 shapeshifter that lets us surveil 1 when it enters the battlefield, and for X, Lazav becomes a copy of target creature in our graveyard with converted mana cost X, except its name is Lazav the Multifarious. It's legendary in addition to its other types, and has this ability. While Aura Skyclave Hierophant is a 3/3 core cleric with lifelink and reads, whenever Aura or another cleric you control dies, return target cleric card with lesser converted mana cost from your graveyard to the battlefield. I have played against a deck that used Aura, and I can tell you right now, this card absolutely gets out of hand very quickly. Now, this party has a ton of creatures showing up, 34 in total actually, but they've been dispersed throughout the video based on their abilities. We have 17 more here, and all of them bring an interesting gift to the party. We have Alai Eternal Pilgrim, Ethereum Horn Sorcerer, and Geist of Saint Trough. Alai is a 2/3 core cleric with Death Touch, and for 1 and sack another creature, we gain life equal to the sacrificed creature's creature's total toughness, and for 1 in Orzhov colors, we can sacrifice another creature, and we exile target non-land permanent, but we can only activate this ability if we have at least 10 or more life than our starting total. Ethereum Horn Sorcerer is a 3/6 Minotaur warrior with 1 in Izzet colors. We return Ethereum Horn Sorcerer to our hand, but it also has Cascade, which in my opinion is one of the craziest keywords in the game, where when you cast this card, you exile cards from the top of your library until you exile a non-land card that costs less. You may then cast that card for free and put the rest of the exiled cards to the bottom of your library in a random order, while Geist of St. Traft is a 2/2 Spirit Cleric with hexproof, and whenever Geist of St. Traft attacks, create a 4/4 white angel creature token with flying that's tapped and attacking. Exile that token at the end of combat. We're also running Guafa, Hazid, Profiteer, Jace, Vryn's Prodigy, and Kenrith the Returned King. Guafa is a 2/2 human rogue, and for Azurus colors and tap it, we put a bribery counter on target creature you don't control. Its controller also draws a card. The party trick here is where they get that draw, but creatures with bribery counters on them can't block or attack. So until they find a way to remove the counter, they're just going to have a useless creature unless it has an ability that they can use off it still. Jace, Vryn's Prodigy is another transform card, starting it as a 0/2 human wizard that taps to draw us a card, then discard a card. If there are 5 or more cards in our graveyard, we exile Jace, Vryn's Prodigy and return it to the battlefield transformed as a Jace Planeswalker. With 5 loyalty and a +1 that reads, up to 1 target creature gets -2/-0 until your next turn. And the -3 lets us cast target instant or sorcery spell from our graveyard this turn, but if that card would enter the graveyard this turn, we exile it instead. And the -9 is an emblem for us that reads, whenever you cast a creature spell, which will be happening a lot, target player puts the 5 cards from their library into the graveyard, while Kenrith the Returned King that just wants everyone at the party to have a good time, as a 5/5 human noble with a ton of abilities packed into one card. For a red, all creatures gain trample and haste until end of turn. For 1 in a green, we put a +1/+1 counter on target creature. For 2 in a white, target player gains 5 life, and for 3 in a blue, target player draws a card, and for 4 in a black, we put target creature card from the graveyard back onto the battlefield under its opponent's control. We're also running Miri, Weatherlight Duelist, Rada, Heart of Keld, and Robber of the Rich. Miri is a 3/2 cat warrior with first strike, and whenever Miri attacks, each opponent can't block with more than 1 creature this combat, and as long as Miri is tapped, no more than 1 creature can attack you each combat. Rada, Heart of Keld is a 3/3 elf warrior that has first strike as long as it's your turn, and will let us look at the top card of our library at any time, and we can cast lands from the top as well. There's also a bonus ability that can be activated multiple times per turn for 4 in Gruul colors to give Rada, Heart of Keld +X/+X until end of turn, where X is equal to the number of lands you control. Check out my Rada, Heart of Keld deck next if you think that ability sounds like fun to abuse. Robber of the Rich is a 2/2 human archer rogue with reach and haste, and whenever Robber of the Rich attacks, if defending player has more cards in their hand than you, exile the top card of their library. During your turn, if you attack with a rogue, you may cast that exiled card and spend mana as if it were any color to cast it. Ruhan of the Fomori, Serendib Sorcerer, and Tabarak's Hopes of Demise are also amusing party members, with Ruhan as a 7/7 giant warrior with, at the beginning of combat on your turn, choose an opponent at random. Ruhan attacks that player this turn if able. Serendib is a 1/1 human wizard with tap, and to make target creature other than Serendib have base power and toughness 0/2 until end of turn, while Tabarax is a 2/2 demon cleric with flying, and Tabarax has lifelink if it has 5 or more +1/+1 counters on it, and whenever another non-token creature you control dies, put a +1/+1 counter on Tabarax. If that creature was a cleric, we may choose to lose 1 life and draw a card. We're almost done with Tanjiro Paragon, Time Stream Navigator, and Unsettled Mariner. Tanjiro is a multi-skilled 3/2 elf that counts as a cleric, rogue, warrior, and wizard, and with a kicker cost for 3, and when it enters the battlefield, if the kicker cost was paid, we reveal the top 6 cards of our library. You may put a card that shares a creature type with it from among them onto your hand, and then put the rest to the bottom of your library in a random order. Time Stream Navigator is a 1/1 human pirate wizard with Ascend, where we gain the city's blessing for the rest of the game, and if we do have the city's blessing, we can pay 2 and double blue to tap Navigator and put it onto the bottom of our library, then take an extra turn. While Unsettled Mariner is the annoying person at the party, is a 2/2 shapeshifter and changeling as well. Whenever you or a permanent you control becomes the target of a spell or ability our opponents control, we counter that spell or ability unless its controller pays 1. The last 2 of the bulk party goers we have here are the infamous Winoda, Joiner of Forces, and the always terrifying Yidris, Maelstrom Wielder. Winoda is a 4/4 human warrior that lets us look at the top 6 cards of our library. When a creature we control attack, may put a human creature from among them onto the battlefield tapped and attacking. It gains indestructible until end of turn, and we put the rest of the cards we looked through to the bottom of our library in a random order. Yidris Maelstrom Wielder feels like the one person who just always goes really hard at the party and never stops as a 5/4 ogre wizard with trample, and whenever Yidris deals combat damage to a player, as you cast spells from your hand this turn, they gain Cascade. So far we've gone over almost all of the party. We have a ton of creatures in attendance, but we're not done just yet. We have 6 cards that thrive in a full party, as well as some party favors to equip. Concerted Defense counters target non-creature spell unless its controller pays 1/1 for each creature in our party. Coveted Prize costs 1 less to cast for each creature in our party as well, and lets us search for any card in our library and put it to our hand, and if we have a full party, we can cast that card without paying its mana cost. Linvala, Shielded Seagate, is a 3/3 angel wizard with flying, and at the beginning of combat on your turn, if you have a full party, choose target non-land permanent and opponent controls. Until your next turn, it can't attack or block, and its activated abilities can't be activated. If we sacrifice Linvala, creatures we control gain our choice of hexproof or indestructible until end of turn. Spoils of Adventure cost 1 less for each creature in our party, and we gain 3 life and draw 2 cards. Thwart the Grave costs 1 less for each creature in our party and lets us return target creature card and up to a target cleric, rogue, warrior, or wizard from our graveyard to the battlefield. And Zagras, Thief of Heartbeats, is our final cost 1 less card as a 4/4 vampire rogue with flying, death touch, as well as haste. And whenever a creature you control deals combat damage to a planeswalker, destroy that planeswalker. We have arrived with gifts, and all of them go perfect with any of our guest's outfit. We have Blackblade Forge, Embercleave, and Godsend. Blackblade gives a creature +1/+1 for each land we control, and equips to a legendary creature for 3 or a normal creature for 7. Embercleave has Flash and costs 1 less for each attacking creature, and gives the equipped creature +1/+1, as well as Double Strike and Trample, while Godsend grants +3/+3, and whenever the equipped creature blocks or becomes blocked by 1 or more creatures, you may exile one of those creatures, and opponents can't cast cards with the same name as cards exiled with Godsend, which really comes in handy in metas where a lot of the same cards are played as an autoclude, as well as staples in common with other players at the table. We also have Mage Slayer, Shadow Spear, and Unscythe, Killer of Kings. Mage Slayer makes the equipped creature deal damage to defending player equal to its power when it attacks. Shadow Spear gives the creature +1/+1, as well as Trample and Lifelink, and for 1 generic mana, permanents our opponents control lose hexproof and indestructible until end of turn. While Unscythe is probably my favorite Scythe art and gives +3/+3 in first strike to the equipped creature, and whenever a creature dealt damage to the equipped creature dies this turn, we remove that card from the game. If we do, we also put a 2/2 black zombie creature token into play, which again, makes zombies. I love zombies. Our final card in the deck is going to be Trading Post, which is another card with a bunch of abilities, all costing 1 generic, and if we discard a card, or we gain 4 life. If we pay 1 life, we create a 0/1 white goat creature token. If we sacrifice a creature, we can return target artifact from our graveyard to our hand, and if we sacrifice an artifact, we can draw a card. There we have it, everyone, the Tazri party theme deck. This deck can very easily get out of control and fully embraces the party mechanic. You're going to be throwing spells out with a ton of reduced cost or even free, all while filling up your board to keep the party going. Your opponents are going to need to keep the counter spells and board wipes at the ready because this deck is resilient and very proactive into taking off as soon as you find your footing. Thank you again to Taro for submitting the first ever viewer submitted list for Dex Techs, where Dex does techs on the decks that you want to play today. Don't forget to subscribe, and if you have not already, be sure to check out the links below if you're wanting to follow me on any other platform. I'm your host Dex, it's been great, and enjoy the rest of your day.